Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Madera City Council. Today is Wednesday, January 6, 2021. It's at 6 p.m. This meeting is conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order, which suspends certain requirements of the Ralph M. Brown Act. The City Council meeting will be live streamed on the city's website. Members of the public may participate in the meeting remotely through an electronic meeting via phone by dialing 669-900-6833, enter ID 979-2296-1791, followed by *9 on your phone to speak. Comments will also be accepted via email at citycouncilpubliccomment@madera.gov or by regular mail at 205 West 4th Street, Madera, California, 93637. Alicia, would you call us to order? Roll call, please.
Here, thank you. Mayor Garcia.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Villegas.
Here.
Councilmember Gallegos.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Montes.
Here.
And Councilmember Evans.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you all please rise for the invocation led to us by tonight by Councilmember Anita Evans?
Heavenly Father, thank you, Father, for this day. Thank you, Father, for waking us up this morning. Thank you for blessing each and every one of us to come together right now in this fellowship, Father, to serve you, to serve Madera. Father, we call on you right now because our land is in distress. We ask, Father God, that you place your loving arms around the United States of America. Touch the leaders of this country, Father God, and direct their path. Father, we're in turmoil right now and we need you. We call on your mighty name, Father God. We ask that you watch over us and keep us and protect each and every one of us, Father. Hear my plea, Father God. Hear my voice. I ask these blessings, Father, in your Son's precious name, Christ Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Councilmember. Would you all maintain standing, and we will be led tonight on the flag of allegiance led by Daniel Foss.
Thank you. Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the
United States of America,
for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all.
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We move on to the approval of the agenda. I would like to ask my colleagues if anyone has any changes to the agenda. Hearing none, seeing none. Oh, we have attendees. No, we do not. I will ask my my colleagues for a motion or take action, please.
I move the motion.
Second.
It has been moved by Councilmember Evans and seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. All those in favor, actually, we will do a roll call. Anita, please.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, would you call a roll call vote?
District 1.
Yes.
District 2.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 6.
Yes.
Mayor Garcia.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes with 6 yes votes and 0 no votes.
Thank you very much. We will now move into public comment. The first 15 minutes of the meeting are reserved for members of the public to address the council on items which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers will be asked but are not required to identify themselves and state the subject of their comments. If the subject is an item on the agenda, the mayor has the option of asking the speaker to hold the comment until that item is called. Comments on items listed as a public hearing on the agenda should be held until the hearing is opened. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusion shall be drawn if the council does not respond to the public comment at this time. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment at this time?
Here I have one email I'd like to read this evening, and it's from Bobby Kwan, Executive Director of Madera County Economic Development Commission.
Excuse me, City Clerk, I think that item's regarding the workshop.
Okay, we'll hold off till the workshop. Thank you.
So
We have one comment from the attendee.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that the only one? That's the only public comment?
Mayor,
Yes, yes.
excuse me, can there is someone on the telephone that has their hand raised?
Yes, that would be, the last four digits is 4040. Could you go ahead and comment now? Hello?
Not sure, Mark, if we can unmute the caller.
Looks like there's two callers. I'm going to move them. Give me just a second here.
I saw a hand raised on a 4040.
Yeah, just give me a second here. Okay. 4040 is allowed to talk.
Hi, this is Nicole Trujillo-Rice with UFCW Local 8. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. My comment also is on the workshop, so I wasn't sure if I should save my comment for then or if it's okay to move forward.
I would
I
recommend,
believe that since it's an item that will be discussed during the workshop, if you could hold your comment during the workshop, and then we'll be happy to take your comment.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else. I think we're done. Okay, since I don't see any other comments regarding public comments, I will close public comment. We don't have any written communications. Am I correct, Alicia?
Correct. No written communications, Mayor.
Okay, well then we'd be happy to hear tonight from the Department of Public Health, Ms. Ross.
Good evening. We are currently, as of yesterday, at a case rate of 49.7. That is the case rate that's reported by the state on a weekly basis every Tuesday. And our county positivity rate is 16.7%. So we are still very much in the surge. Our hospitals are still experiencing a lot of strain. Our ambulance system experiencing a lot of strain. We are seeing things happen in other counties that are really concerning, that we have not yet seen in Madera County and truly hope to avoid. But we are consistently communicating with that system to understand what their needs are and what level of support is required. And so we continue to communicate with residents and leadership to urge people to follow stay-at-home order guidance so that we can slow the community transmission of COVID and get out of this surge. Turning to vaccination, which I'm sure there'll probably be some questions about vaccination, and so I'll just give you a quick overview. I think what's most important to know is that we have a dedicated page for COVID vaccination. It's maderacounty.com/COVID-19 vaccine. It includes the California Department of Public Health prioritization phases. And so right now we're in phase 1A. There are several tiers. There's 3 tiers to that. But at this point, we are able to provide vaccination to individuals who are eligible in any of those 3 tiers because we have adequate vaccine on hand for the number of people that are in that full phase. So we have scheduled clinics Thursday and Friday of this week. Many of those employers who have been communicating with us about the number of people that they have ready to go received a link for those frontline healthcare workers to register and to become vaccinated. This is, of course, in addition to the vaccines that have already been administered to hospital staff, both at Madera Community Hospital and Valley Children's. So phase 1A, as I said, includes frontline healthcare workers. So hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, our clinics like primary healthcare providers, CAMRENA, and as well as IHSS, in-home supportive services workers. That's not a comprehensive list, but it's on that web link if you'd like to take a look at it. And also there you'll find what's in phase 1B and what's in phase 1C. What you'll notice is that once we get past 1A, the number of people in Madera County that will be eligible to be vaccinated will increase exponentially because phase 1B, the very first tier, includes education. Well, everyone's 75 and up, education, and food and agricultural workers. And that food and agricultural worker umbrella is quite broad. It's everyone who works in agriculture and anyone who works in food service. So just that first tier of 1B is going to be a whole lot of people that are eligible. And by the time we work through that phase, it looks like, somewhere 70-80% of our adult population will be in that phase. And of course, it's going to take us time to be able to roll that out to everyone, but we're doing everything we can to scale up very quickly. There are a couple things that are limitations on our side, clinicians. And so we're rolling out before the end of this week, a volunteer program for clinicians to help us vaccinate and other staff so that what we are working towards is the ability to do mass vaccination clinics 10 hours per day, 7 days a week. And so that in combination with primary healthcare providers and our hospitals, we hope to roll out vaccine very quickly to Madera County residents as soon as people become eligible. And of course, vaccine supply is available. So I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Are there any questions from my colleagues for Ms. Moss? I'm looking for attendees. I don't see any hands raised there. As always, I want to thank you for coming and attending our meeting and giving us an update. It's very, very educational for us to be able to hear the message. I'm sure that we've all seen that at the beginning, people were hesitant to wear a mask, but I see that it's working now. The message has sunk in and people are taking steps. So I really appreciate you continuing to come and joining us to reiterate the message about safekeeping of themselves and their families. So I thank you for that, sir.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate the partnership with the City of Madera. It has been really, really positive with your chief, Lawson. I talked with him today and do so regularly with your city manager, really proactive in communicating with us and working with us and making city property available for us to be able to do testing. And we're still working some of that out because of weather. But we really appreciate the partnership with City of Madera. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will now move on to our workshop. Item A1 is a workshop on pending cannabis regulatory ordinance and related procedures. This will be led by our city manager, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, Arnoldo Rodriguez, City Manager. Helping me on tonight's presentation will be Hilda, our City Attorney, and David McPherson is having some challenges logging on. So Mark, would you mind sending him the invite again?
Sure.
Thank you. So he'll be joining us in a couple of minutes. While Mark's doing that, I'm going to share my screen with the council. And I will go ahead and begin my presentation. So some of the material that I'll be presenting tonight may be a slight repeat for some of the veteran council members. However, for the benefit of our two newest council members, I'll be providing a couple of details that that again, for some of the veteran council members will be a repeat, as well as some of the community members, as well as staff. So this workshop tonight is to solicit feedback from council prior to staff attempting to finalize a draft ordinance before we bring it to the council or before we surface it for community feedback. So a little bit of background, the city of Madera, as this council is well aware, does not currently permit cannabis sales within the city. And that's all aspects of cannabis, cultivation, testing. However, due to the evolving landscape in the cannabis industry, the council had instructed staff to begin to explore some potential opportunities. At that time, going back to May of 2019, we retained HDL, who's a subject matter expert on the matter. At the time, if memory serves me, HDL had prepared about 70 plus ordinances out of the 120 that existed in the state at the time. And it was really a two-pronged approach. Prong one was to prepare a measure for consideration by the voters. And prong two was to develop an ordinance in terms of processes and how to go about the permitting process. We're currently in phase two of the two-prong approach. In terms of prong one, Measure R was placed on the ballot on the general election of November 3rd, 2020. The community approved that tax measure, or that measure, I should say, by a vote of over 67%. And what that measure accomplishes, it sets the maximum limit that the city can tax to $10 per canopy per square foot for cultivation. And there is an adjustment clause in the ordinance. It establishes a max of 6% for gross sales receipt for retail and 4% for all other. The council always has the authority or the discretion to place a lower threshold on that. However, in no case can the council exceed those thresholds. I should also add that the council should not feel pressure to approve an ordinance to allow it. While the voters approved it at 67%, it's still up to the council to decide if cannabis and which type of cannabis industry or businesses should be located in the city. So again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is for feedback before staff, David, and it looks like David did join us, so thank you, David. Gary, Roger, the chief and myself really start to get into the weeds on some of the criteria, because what eventually comes back before council is more than likely going to probably be a 40 to 60 page document. And so they are labor intensive, and there's a lot of legal criteria in the ordinances. And before we got too far down that path, we said it's probably a good idea that we go before the council and we get some feedback. So what I'm sharing right now is a 7-step process that we have been discussing internally. And I mean internally, primarily Hilda and myself, as well as David, the police chief, our planning manager, as well as our finance director. And I understand that this is probably a little confusing for most, but I will go into every step. However, what I did want to show for those of us that are visual learners, step one would be the ordinances, and that's currently where we're at as part of the second prong of our approach. So again, we have the ordinances, and I will get into every one of those. The second step would be procedures and guidelines about how we go about permitting them. Step 3 would be a lottery system, which we'll define. Number 4 would be land use review and public meetings. Step 5 is defining what the role of the city manager is. Step 6 is defining what the role of the city council is. And then step 7 is what are some of the thresholds and what's the criteria once a business becomes operational. At the end of my presentation, we can go back to this, which identifies some of the key points throughout the discussion, or some key decision points, or some feedback that staff is going to be requesting of council this evening. So step 1 is an ordinance, and that's really the first step in beginning to identify a framework for how to go about permitting a cannabis business in the city of Madera. We would want to make sure that the language is it's consistent with state law. The cannabis industry is heavily regulated by the state of California. As council may be aware in the staff report that we provided you last week, there's a lot of regulations that the state has put out over the past couple of years. It's been somewhat of a fluid process for the state, and it's ever evolving, but any ordinance we prepare would obviously have to comply with state law. The third part to it would be city policies that the city would like to see. And by the city, I mean the city council. D would be ensuring that we have operational best practices. Again, this industry, it's moving quickly. It's a relatively new industry. When you look at the timelines in comparison to other industries, for example, say fast food and drive-thrus that have been around for 50 or 60 years, the cannabis industry in California is relatively new. Identifying thresholds for distances to sensitive uses. The state currently has criteria for distance requirements between cannabis businesses, between them and schools, daycares, and youth facilities. And there are definitions of that contained within the state guidelines. However, the council has the discretion to include additional sensitive uses, and the council has the ability to define what those are. For example, the council could say, we want a specific distance to single family homes or residential, or a park or a library. The one thing that I would caution the council on is any one of these, we would want to make sure that we ground truth it. And I'll provide you with an example. Courthouse Park is in the center of the city, and it's right along Gateway and Yosemite. If the city were to say, at some point, we would like to allow retail cannabis businesses on Yosemite Avenue. However, if we provide a threshold of hypothetically, say 600 feet from a city park or a community park, we would want to be sure that that's the intention. And then we would want to take a look at that on the map to say, does this really accomplish what the goal is? Because like anything, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and that's an example where we could have an unintended consequence. We may not be allowing it in downtown, but the council may have every intent of allowing it in downtown. And then the second part of step 1 is the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance currently does not allow for cannabis retail sales or cultivation or testing. So anything we do as part of the regulatory ordinance, we would want to be sure that we address those parts. As I'm going through this, I'll obviously leave it up to the mayor and the council if you would want to provide feedback or if you have any questions, or we can wait till the end. But I'm going to be throwing a lot of information, and then we do have some a series of questions at the tail end of this that we would like to get some feedback. But knowing that it is a lot of information to digest, if the council feels it necessary or would like us to return at our next meeting, we can always do that as well. So step 2 that was identified in that table was procedures and guidelines. And within step 2, there's 2 parts. There's part A. Staff is recommending that we would identify, we have an ordinance that allows it, but then we would have a second document that would come back to council. It would be adopted by a resolution, not an ordinance. And that would identify the application criteria for businesses. Some of the things some of the items that staff is recommending that should be included as part of that would be a business plan by the applicants to make sure that we're having good operators. A section within that would contain a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan by the applicants. We would want a safety plan that articulates what measures the businesses would take to ensure that their business is safe, their employees, as well as the surrounding community. A neighborhood compatibility plan to ensure that any businesses that are permitted are compatible with surrounding neighbors. And then also a community benefits section that where an applicant would have the ability to articulate or elaborate in terms of what community benefits they would be providing the community for having the luxury of having a business in the city. Part 2, or Part B, I should say. So this would be step 2, or Part B and step 2 of step 2. So it is a little confusing. I do apologize for that. But as part of the procedures and guidelines that would contain those elements, right now staff is recommending that city staff, along with David and Hilda, would prepare those procedures and guidelines, and we would bring them back to council for formal adoption. And when I'm saying bring them back, we would all obviously want council feedback to make sure that we capture any items that the council felt were important to address. As part of that, we would include the applications, the forms, the indemnification. We would also identify the cost recovery fees. For example, how much is an application going to be? We want to be sure that we do that on the front end, so potential businesses are very clear and they understand exactly what it's going to cost to apply for a license in the city. We would want the principal owner of the business, not every employee, simply the principal owner or owners, to undergo a background. And then also, again, we would file, we would identify the fee should someone want to appeal the city's decision, or and I'm saying the city's, really, there are several steps in the process where someone could potentially appeal. We would simply want to make sure that we identify the fees up front. So again, so there are no surprises to the industry. As part of step 2, once the council were to take action on the policies and procedures that would identify the different criteria, we would establish a point system for the review of every application. Hypothetically, and I have no insight on this, so, and this is a strict hypothetical, if we were to receive 20 applications, we would want to compare the applications to make sure that we had the kind of businesses that we deem qualified to operate. So one thing that staff would recommend is that if we identified a point system, and every business, or every application, I should say, that achieved a certain threshold, we use the number 90% on here simply as a starting point. That number could land anywhere that the council desires. It can be 95, it can be 85. But at that point, any application that would achieve or reach that threshold would go into a lottery. And I'll explain the lottery as part of step 3. But the number of permits, we would also identify as part of the policies and procedures. And again, that would come back to council, and that would be adopted by a resolution. And any potential applicant that would score below the threshold. So hypothetically, if the number is 90 points, if an applicant were to score less than 90, they would have the option of appealing the decision, and that decision would go to city council or an appeal board. We haven't prepared it, but those are some of the items that we can get into in a few minutes in terms of feedback from the council. Step 3 would be a lottery, where every application that would meet the minimum points, and again, for argument's sake, let's say it's 90, and we had 10 applications that reach 90 points, and if the city hypothetically say that we were going to do 5 applications, and that's not a number I'm advocating for, that's simply an example, they would be placed in a lottery. All 10 applications would be drawn and would be positioned so the top 5 would move forward initially. However, if one of those top 5 applicants would drop out, we would go to number 6. And so the lottery would establish the eligibility list, and there are two recommended, or there's a recommendation where we could do one for retail businesses, and then we can do a second lottery for non-retail businesses. Another alternative could be is we only do one for lottery. And then for all other types of cannabis businesses, for example, cultivation, which because of the market trends, we would, it would be great if we were to receive an application for cultivation, but we're not guaranteed. And David has much more insight in terms of where the industry is going on cultivation, and he can definitely speak to that. So that's another point where, or another area where staff would seek feedback. Now, in terms of the lottery itself, if the council elects to move forward with the lottery system that we're recommending this evening, the results of the lottery themselves would not be appealable because every applicant would have the same chance of being selected. At that point, the only appealable process would be the process, or up to this point, I should state, would be the rating process if they did not receive the minimum numbers. But once you're in the lottery, if you had a 91% versus a 98%, you have the same opportunities of being selected because again, everyone that scores above 90 would go into the lottery. After the eligibility list is identified and the number of applicants are selected, they would move on to step 4. In step 4, as part of that step, staff would verify that the land use or the property that they selected is eligible. And we could potentially have to do review for consistent with California Environmental Quality Act. Not in all cases, but in some cases, but that's largely going to be depending on the applicant and the location. We would want to take a look at that. As part of step 4, another item that staff would recommend is that we would hold a community meeting to solicit community feedback per application. The purpose of the meeting would not be to make a decision, rather it would to be sure that staff had all the information and that the neighbors, hypothetically, say that there's a business and staff was unaware that there was a daycare next door. We would simply want to be sure that those that the surrounding property owners would have an opportunity to voice any concerns they may have about that business. In terms of the body that would receive the feedback, we would recommend that it either be the community development director, that vacant is currently positioned, or that position is currently vacant, I should say, or the planning commission. But again, it would not be an actionable item. It's simply to solicit feedback. After the feedback is obtained, staff would then go back, and there's a couple of different options we can explore here. Either the city manager can take the feedback, compile it, and make a recommendation to council, or the city manager could serve in the role as the approving body of the applications. And it's largely at the discretion of city council. Regardless of what role the city manager plays, if the city manager approves or denies an application, an appellant would legally be, or the city would have to establish a process where the applicant has the ability to exhaust their administrative remedies, which means that they would have the ability to appeal before the city council. That's one option. The other option would be that the city manager takes the feedback from the community, consolidates all the information that they've received up to that point, and then in turn goes before the city council and makes a presentation before the city council and makes a recommendation. That would be step 6. So step 5 and step 6 could go in a couple of different directions. As part of any process, staff would recommend, if the city council serves as the appealing body or as the action body, staff would recommend that we again notify the property owners, the surrounding property owners within 300 feet, just to make sure that, again, we want to be transparent, we want to invite public testimony, and we simply want to be sure that people understand what's happening in their backyard. Regardless of what scenario the council elects to can move forward with, either the city manager being the action, taking action, or the city council action is final. The only way to overturn city council action would be through litigation, and I'll defer to Hilda on that item. And then step 7 would be operations. The ordinance would have criteria. It would have operational criteria that would identify how long a business has to exercise their right for their permit. In this case, we put 1 year, but we can easily obviously change it to 1 year or 18 months or something along those lines, or 1 year from time that the city council takes action or something like that to be reasonable. But the goal here is any business that is fortunate to be selected, we want to make sure that there's a sunset clause because we want to get them open. So the goal is to not have permits out there where there's no action or where businesses are not open. If we're going to allow business, then we should try to do everything come within our authority to make sure that they open up. And that would be the goal there. You may recall as part of step 2, the owners of the principals of a company, in order to advance to the lottery, we would do a background, a background check on the principals of or the owners of a company. However, once a business is operational, the ordinance, we are recommending that the employees are also subject. The employees of the business would be subject to a background check. And then we would recommend that we include language for how a business that is not complying with city regulations or state regulations, we would have the ability to suspend it, to revoke it, or some action to take action to make sure that we don't have bad operators in our community. And then also consistent with state law, we would recommend that this permit be reviewed annually. So both reviewed and renewed annually, and that's consistent with state law as well. There would also be a clause in there that if there's a change of ownership of greater than 51%, that change of ownership would have to come before council. Now the council can say, you know what, that's okay, we'll defer to the city manager, and that's perfectly okay. What we're trying to do through this process is identify best industry practices, and that's something that's pretty consistent across the board, and David can speak to that. And then also with the last bullet point there, should a location change, we would suggest that come back before the city council. However, the city council very well could say, you know what, no, we'll defer to the city manager unless it's appealed. But again, our goal through this process was to identify a process that reflected best industry practices, but at the same time, there's a couple of decision points through this process. One thing I do want to highlight that you may have noticed, going back to step 1, that staff is only recommending one permit in this process, and that's a cannabis business permit. Some communities have a cannabis business permit, and then they also have a land use permit, it's commonly a conditional use permit. We are recommending that we do one permit that includes both items rather than a 2 permit process. I think what that does is it expedites the process. It gives people one bite at the apple. It's very fair to the industry. It's fair to the community at the same time because we would have community outreach. And the other thing is that even if we had a 2 permit process, and then the city would have to process that. Granted, could we charge fees to recoup our any resources? Absolutely. The challenge we have as a city is we have a bandwidth issue that we would have to do the work, and quite frankly, we don't have the bandwidth right now to do it. But we think that one permit would achieve everything that we would want to achieve. In terms of some discussion and direction from council this evening, and again, this is not something that we have to have this evening, but it's something that if the council is prepared to discuss and would like to provide feedback, we'll take it. But if council decides, let's hit the pause button and we can come back to the next meeting, then that's okay as well. So I just talked about this first bullet point, cannabis business permit. Staff is recommending 1 permit versus a 2 permit process, which is a business license and a land use permit. the lottery system. When David first approached Hilda and I and discussed the lottery process, it took Hilda and I a little bit of time to kind of wrap our heads around it, because it's not a foreign concept, but it was a foreign concept to the city of Madera. And so the more we spoke with David, the more comfortable we felt recommending this approach. And again, one of the items that I continue to bring up to David is I'd like to attempt to minimize potential litigation. And I want to have a very equitable process, a very transparent process. And I think the lottery process achieves every one of those. A public meeting. We've identified 300 feet. The council could say we want to extend it to 350. The council could say whatever parameters the council would like to set, we're okay with. 300 feet is a common number in city planning. And the reason for that is in state law, anytime there's a conditional use permit, the city notifies surrounding property owners within 300 feet. And so we put 300 feet. Again, if the council wanted to extend that, that's okay as well. The purpose of the meeting would be to solicit community feedback. The council very well could say, you know what, let's just hold a community meeting in front of the council instead of a planning commission or the community development director, and that's okay as well. Sensitive uses, there are some state thresholds that define that. However, the city can always add more. The only caveat to that I would recommend is that if the council is inclined to add any businesses or any uses and any distances, allow staff to go back to ground truth some of that, just to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences as a result. Another item would be the role of the city manager. As part of this, I described during one of the slides, it was section 5, if I recall. The role of the city manager could be one where the city manager is making a recommendation to council versus taking action. And again, this David could articulate what his experience is in other communities, but that's a decision point that the council would need to make. And then also, what's the role of the council? Does the council want to be the approving body, or does the council prefer to be the appeal body? If it's the appeal body, the city manager would take action, either approve or deny an application, and then the applicant at that point would have an opportunity to appeal the city manager action, and then that action item would go before the city council for final action. And then also ownership changes. We've established a threshold of 51% would have to come back to council. We would like feedback on that. And again, in terms of industry standards, I'll defer to David on most of these items. And then also location changes. So with that, I understand I just threw a lot at the city council. This, I'll go back to the Excel spreadsheet just because it was so useful for at least for myself, and I know for Hilda, because we're both visual people, and it made a lot of sense when we set it up. But it does show every step that we talked about right here, beginning with ordinances. And this is where we're at right now. Where I would say we're at right now is we're kind of under the framework for cannabis business permit, where we're simply establishing it. But we are requesting feedback on most of these items. And then again, we'll come back eventually to council with the draft ordinance for feedback. Don't mind the colors. The colors are only for kind of to break up the different steps. They have no other meaning. I simply wanted to make it look good. So with that, I'll look to David and Hilda to see if you would like to add something that I may have missed or something else before I turn it back to the council, if that's okay.
Sure, I'll chime in. David did prepare a draft ordinance maybe 3 months ago, and we had numerous meetings with the various departments, and we really kept getting a bit bogged down in it. And then all of a sudden at one meeting, he presented us with a lottery concept, and it was a bit of a shock initially because it was something brand new for us, but he explained it, and he can explain it to you more thoroughly than I can, certainly. But but my research is very telling, and that is that the applicant pool that cities get regarding retail, in particular, retail cannabis, is voluminous. David has stories with entities that have over 100 of applicants. And so as he kept describing the process and the pros and cons, he really sold your city manager and myself on pursuing a lottery process. And from my perspective, the big sell was the fact that in my research, I learned that there are so many cases out there. There is litigation in practically every city that has a cannabis ordinance. And we really felt that this was a really good way to minimize litigation. Is it going to keep it out completely? Maybe not, but it certainly will minimize it, because if you limit it to the top contenders, whether that number is 5 or 10, as Arnoldo has said, you're already limiting the number of potential litigants. And so this process that we're at now, this step one, it seems like it's going to be a long process, but step one, once you make those decisions and give direction, that's going to drive the entire process for the applicants to come in for review, and then for ultimate operations and ultimate revenue for the city. And I'll be here if you have any other questions. I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Hilda. So one of the reasons why we presented this process to the city was 5 years ago, when we were first doing application reviews, is that we tend to have an industry that had an A ban, B ban, and C ban. And so, if you want to get the best of breed in the city, and if you got rid of the B and the C ban and only play with the A ban, that was great. And that was fully defined. But as we progressed 3-4 years later, those businesses that are applying are getting better and better. And in the last year, we've had about 250 applications. And out of those 250 applications, probably 230 of them scored 90% or better. So we're no longer talking about 3 bans, we're talking about 1 ban. And in some cases, the difference between the number 1 applicant and the 50th applicant is less than 2.5% by the time you review their proposals. And so there's not a big differential in them. So how do you tell, if you're going to move 5 or let's say 10 to a step 3 traditionally to an interview, and tell 40 of those or 90% of those that scored a 90 plus, so they don't get to continue playing, they don't take it too well. And so therefore, they're looking to how they position themselves. And now you have all those that didn't get to come to get interviewed basically appeal. And appeals are taking somewhere from 1 year to 3 years to actually address all those appeals. To really, at the end of the day, you're just basically, all good businesses. It's just a matter of which ones are fortunate to continue moving forward. And there's those that are good businesses that don't move forward. And unfortunately, they want to try to continue the fight. And so that's really why we've come to this. And as Hilda said, the goal would be is, how do you eliminate litigation or appeals? And at the same time, you as policymakers keep you from having to be in difficult situations that cause problems. And sometimes it's just the political influence. Sometimes, unfortunately, we've seen the corruption component. Some of it's just peer pressure. Some of it's no matter what, you can't make the right decision because they're all good, right? And like I mentioned, you got a lot of good businesses and you got to leave some out, and there's always going to be people that don't want to be there. So that's kind of why we've kind of proposed that. And the other 2 key things that come out of that is, by not doing interviews, the industry has gotten used to what's going to be in an interview. If you do them quite often, you can change the questions all you want, but they end up at the same place. They already kind of know the questions, the answers before they have answers before you have the question. So then you really don't create any separation in that, which is originally the intent of that. And what the lottery we think is also going to do, and I think Ronaldo mentioned it, just like the difference between a discretionary and a CUP, we think we're going to get this process down where you can get a business up and running from beginning to end of this process in 12 months, not just getting through this process in 12 months to 18 months and then opening in year 2 or 3, that they could actually be cutting a ribbon 12 months into this because you've streamlined a lot of the functionalities of it to get them where they need to be, and also keep their costs down, because then that's less cost to them to use it for getting their building, their permits done, not trying to get through this process. And then the last element of it is there, if you have 50 businesses, or let's say even 25 businesses, they're all holding on to properties that they're leasing in your community, and the longer the process gets delayed, those are other businesses that don't get to use those properties to bring other businesses in the community because they're all tied up until a final decision is made. So this way, once people know they're in or out, those properties can be released and let other businesses use those properties, or property owners can start trying to bring other businesses into those properties instead of just tying them up. Of course, they make money by the leases, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's creating jobs or revenue or economic development from them sitting empty during that lengthy process. So I'll stop there.
And thank you, David. So kind of tonight, how I said, we threw a lot of information. We've been talking for about 40 minutes straight about cannabis. And we understand kind of it's simply a lot of information. So again, so staff will take the lead from council. If council feels like they want to ask questions tonight, want to digest it, however the council would like to provide feedback. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor and the council. Thank you.
Mayor, one thing I would recommend is that you perhaps allow public input, and then you begin your discussions and deliberations and determinations.
I'd also, before we do that, thank you very much for that report, and thank you for that suggestion, Hilda. I believe, Mr. Rodriguez, you had mentioned that you had a group discussing this, and you also included the chief.
I did.
So if the chief, you would like to chime in, I would appreciate that. And then if you had anybody else, Mr. Rodriguez, in that group, I would like to hear from them also, before I bring it to questions from council and the public.
Yeah, Chief, would you like to add anything?
I would just add that this was a lot of hard work was put into this. I'll compliment everybody in there. Hilda, David, very impressed with Mr. Ferguson and his organization, helped us out a lot. Very pleased with this, and I think the council and the citizens will be pleased with the outcome of what you decide with the cannabis program. A lot of thought went into it, and we're going to take more from the community and get their input. This is very transparent and upfront, and I'm very pleased with where we're at so far.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Chief, for that. I want to bring it back to the public before I bring it to council for any kind of questions or opinions that might have. I'd like to open it up for the public to be able to chime in. I do have I believe it's last four digits is 6252. So if you would like to make a comment regarding the workshop, please do so. Could we allow this person to comment now? Mark, are these folks, are they unmuted?
I pulled the wrong one in.
It's all right. We can do this.
Well, go ahead and talk.
Thank you so much, Mayor Garcia, fellow council members, and staff. I really want to thank you all. I think as some folks and most folks have noted, There does seem like there has been a lot of hard work that has gone into this, and we'd like to recognize that and thank you. My name is Nicole Trujillo Rice. I'm the Political and Legislative Director of the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 8. Our union represents nearly 35,000 members in various industries, including the legalized cannabis industry. And we hope that this body will commit to including strong labor standards, such as those that were written within the Fresno City Ordinance and many other cities and counties throughout California. We believe broader and more defined labor and safety requirements ensure responsible applicants will be on a level playing field and will make it easier for the city to identify responsible operators who will adhere to the labor, workplace, and environmental standards and best practices. I want to highlight and make it clear that including these such standards does not preclude operators from applying. It just simply sets a bar for the types of jobs that will be created. I'd also like to mention that we as a union are strongly opposed to a lottery system. We recommend the city adopt a merit-based selection process. We feel that this ensures applicants are solely scored on their merit and ranked accordingly. The top contenders themselves could be contested. Litigation could ensue regardless. So we do feel that this should be a ranking system on the best and most qualified applicants, those that will be employing the City of Madera residents. Just a few highlights from other ordinances that have strong labor standards throughout the state, including directly from Fresno, requiring applicants to submit a labor peace agreement for companies with 5 or more employees with a bona fide labor union, further defining what a labor union is under DIR code, requiring applicants to submit a workforce plan that will include a commitment to hire at least 30% of people residing in the city of Madera, like a local hire provision, apprenticeship opportunities, or a plan to assist financially with continuing education, a commitment to pay living wages, and finally, a signed commitment that the company has employed or will employ 1 employee and 1 supervisor that have received the mandatory 30-hour Cal OSHA certification per state law. Those are just a few highlights. And, you know, we feel now more than ever we should be focused on quality job creation, with the unemployment numbers continuing to grow and the reality that just certain jobs and industries won't recover from the global pandemic. We should be welcoming the opportunity to create good jobs and stable employment. And I can tell you the UFCW has a deep understanding how to make the cannabis industry work well for everyone involved. We have a long and proud history of advocacy for workers, their families, and communities they serve in, and highly other regulated sectors such as agriculture, pharmaceutical, distillery, manufacturing, and processing. And just as we've done for those industries, our union has been instrumental in shaping policy on the local and state level that allow workers to organize without fear of intimidation, promote health and safety standards, highlight career pathways, promote social equity, and protect consumer safety within the cannabis industry. I think it's vital to consider the fact that while newly legal, the cannabis industry has existed in California for a very long time. From growing to harvesting to production to sales, all aspects of the industry have an extensive history across our state. However, the illegal nature of the industry means that in many cases, a culture still exists that works against concerns like worker safety and health protocols. The culture will not change overnight, and it's going to take some time for workers to appreciate their new rights, and even more time for Title VIII regulations to adapt to new and unforeseen hazards. So in the meantime, a focus on prevention really remains the best way to keep workers safe and free from intimidation. So we do believe that you should include strong and broad, labor and economic standards. The UFCW is joined by several large cannabis operators who share the same opinion, and our partnership with the operators raise standards for cannabis workers across California. And we're proud to represent the workers at the forefront of the legalized cannabis industry. We strongly encourage the city to include these standards and ensure communities like Madera get a maximum economic benefit from each new license that's granted, and that each new job is a boom on the local economy and not just simply a drain on the social safety net. I really appreciate your time and the hard work that everyone has done, and look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, and we'll certainly continue to reach out to our communities. I have a person with the last 4 digits of 6252. If we could allow them to speak.
Can you hear me, Council?
Yes.
Oh, my apologies, a little trouble connecting. My name is Norman Allender. I'm at 163 North Park Drive in Madera, and I am the Director of Development for Greenbrier Holdings. Greenbrier is a vertically integrated cannabis company. We have a 350,000 square foot cultivation facility in Santa Barbara County and a 22,000 square foot facility in Parlier that has distribution, manufacturing, and a delivery-only retail sale operation. My second point, I have 3 points, main points. My second point is about taxes. Now, we do operate a retail delivery facility, and as many of you know, retail delivery facilities are not constrained by borders. And so let me say that you have an option in setting your taxes on this, but as a comparison, if your taxes were higher than, say, Fresno or Parlier or some other jurisdiction, then the customer has a choice, right? And so I just want to put that out there as a point about where you set your tax rate. That'll affect competition from neighboring jurisdictions. The third point in general is about the presentation tonight. I have been engaged for several years with various members of the staff and the council, but this is the most detailed information we have gotten, so I haven't yet digested it. But the idea of 1 permit versus 2 permits is a great idea. Great idea. By the way, let me back up. Your city manager is a very good presentation, as did the city attorney and the HDL folks. So I would say that 1 permit is a great way to go. I like all the talk about streamlining and getting things going quicker. We have participated in several jurisdictions that are competitive and with ordinance written by HDL and have done well under the merit-based system. The concept of the lottery is new to us, right? So I understand that it's intended to avoid controversy or litigation, but as you know, attorneys don't just take that for granted, and in some level, it could invite controversy. Again, as a point that was made during the presentation, if you receive a 98 and someone else receives a 91, and you are not selected in the lottery, well, then you're very likely going to pursue litigation, especially if the lottery is not appealable, right? Because that is your only option, is litigation, right? When your administrative remedies are not available. So I just threw this out again. I have not digested this. This is a lot of detail, by the way, great amount of detail. I appreciate it. But that jumped out at me is we don't want this to be arbitrary or capricious, right? I mean, a lottery system, I don't know that it's very predictable. So I would just throw that out there as a term and a concern that will come there. We will give more information and follow up in writing. Thank you very much. But I will part with a question, if it's available, is what other jurisdictions have a lottery currently? I would be interested in that. But thank you very much. Again, a lot of new information, a lot to digest, and thank you, Mayor, Council.
And thank you, and welcome to our world. Our staff does a really great job of providing us with information, throws a lot at us. So frequently we do have to take time to digest it. But I thank you very much for your comments. I don't see any more public comments, Alicia, but you did say that you had another written comment that was sent in by email. Could you read that now, please?
Thank you. Yes, I received an email for the mayor and council members on behalf of Bobby Kahn, Executive Director of Madera County Economic Development Commission. The Honorable Mayor Santos and council members, while I support policy that establishes cannabis dispensaries within the city limits of Madera, I hope the council moves with deliberate caution when they consider growing, drying, warehousing, and other industrial type uses. The effect this could have on traditional industrial uses that create living wage jobs could be devastating, as it will most likely drive industrial prices dramatically upwards. This type of price increase can easily cause manufacturers, food processors, logistic operators, and others to look outside of the city of Madera. I thank you for your time and consideration in this critical matter.
Thank you very much. I'm going to allow, or we're going to move on to my colleagues. I see that Councilmember Gallegos has a comment or a question.
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. I have just a comment. I'm going to go through my notes so I don't skip anything. First of all, I'd like to thank the callers for calling in and being concerned and having acknowledgement that we are moving forward with this in the city. Also, thanking the staff for all that hard work and that ordinance. Boy, it was a great job, well done. The concern that our callers have, and maybe some other people have on this council, is the merit and the lottery system. I can say from experience that our RDA redevelopment agency 4 years ago actually did this lottery system. We had 10 lots that we were building homes on. And before I got on council, the lots that the RDA building was giving were to certain developers. And it was being said that it was a friend of a friend of a friend. So what they did with the last 10 lots when I came on council is that they did a lottery system, because when they went to the merit system, they had all the developers that rated the same amount. And so who decides who gets these lots to build on? And that's when I sat in and watched firsthand the lottery system that the developers all were a part of to decide on who was going to develop each lot through a lottery system. And they could always say no if it's not the lot that they wanted, but that was the fairest way to do it, and it worked very well, and they were all very happy with that. So I'm feeling that this lottery is the best way to go. It worked back then, and this was like 4 years ago when we were building left and right in the city of Madera. I support everything that has been put out by our city manager and the presentation. So those are my comments. Mayor Garcia, thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Councilmember Gallegos. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Garcia. I too wanted to thank staff for the information that was provided. I know that was quite a bit of information to divulge. Being that it is a workshop and this is why we're here, is to ask these questions. And with respects to either lottery permits and what have you, I think this is a good opportunity for council to dive in and ask these questions. David, my first question is for you, and I think you might have answered it, but if you can please touch on this. What's been some of the concerns just revolving around litigation with other cities as far as the current process other than the lottery? What have you seen arise with maybe the merit system or what have you, that has become such an issue where litigation is inevitable?
So the three areas that are always circled around in every litigation, and the one gentleman mentioned, is that the scoring is arbitrary and capricious. How I score one applicant over another that says similar things, and they got one score, and someone else got a different score, and yet they say the same thing. So by having a defined matrix over time, we've defined our matrix a lot clearer, be consistent on that. So that kind of eliminates the arbitrary and capricious part. The second part is that the agency creates a process and then doesn't follow the process. They start modifying it in midstream. They make changes to it. They do something to favor someone or doesn't favor someone. And then they get sued over that because they changed it. And that's another one. The third one is because it's a political component, as you guys are as council members, is that you get influenced to some degree or another, or because of the decisions you made, that there's pressure on that component that puts a lot of difficulty on you to how you make a decision. And so by not being involved in that decision, you eliminate that litigation of someone saying that you were influenced, that it was an inside person or someone who was favored. So this was all just, a process as you went through. At the end of the day, you already knew the results. Those are the three reasons why. The lottery process would eliminate those three things, because you wouldn't have already made a selection and someone's challenging not being selected. You let them opportunity to appeal and vet that. And if they happen to win their appeal, they can move into the process and the appeal. And also because they're not guaranteed to get into a slot, it only gets them to get into the lottery. They have less likely of a desire to want to fight the process, because it doesn't mean fighting it's going to get you one of those slots.
Thank you. And now the added language on these current applications that you see now with the ordinances, obviously that doesn't really have an effect. litigation, right? Added additional language other than the lottery, assuming that you added more language that would deter litigation, it'd still be inevitable, right? Is that what you're saying? Is that
we have some processes that are well defined and followed to the T, and you will still have people that appeal them and litigate them. And at the end of the day, they lose their litigation or appeal, but that exhausts a lot of time and energy and resources to get through it, the due process.
Now, you brought up a really good point about how these B and Cs or these other companies that have done really well now, they've kind of modified their way of providing good applications, so to speak, that will take them to the next phase. In doing so, how do we know that we're getting the best company or the best entity coming into our city, assuming that a lot of these players already know how the system runs, so they're all going to score about the same? But I'm assuming the lottery is it's a probability, right? So how does the city deter from having, let's say, a company put multiple applications to different entities, and the city not having a decision as far as what it wants? I mean, and I'm not trying to say that I'm biased, but at some point or something, I have to be cognizant to think that if I'm trying to build or help build into a city, I want to make sure that there's the right companies coming in that are going to be here for the betterment of this community, and not so much to try to make themselves a quick buck or so. So is there something in the language that deters from that we do, like it's a background, or is it something that we do so that, again, lotteries are probabilities, and the more applications you have, the more likely you are to get selected. How would you go about deterring something like that, or how would we go about that?
Sure. So in the old days, when we would just say turn an application and it'd be a different LLC or corporation, we would be able to do that. The way our application process is designed is that 100% of ownership needs to be identified. And we require, or we indicate on there that you can't have ownership, if that's the desire of the city. You can't have ownership in more than one business. And we also have them fill out a disclosure ownership acknowledgement forms that any straw organizations, anything that they do to try to manipulate that or to massage that, they're automatically disqualified. And if they happen to get a permit somehow, that they can basically be terminated as a disqualifier. And we have seen that, especially when you have a local preference or a preference criteria in there. People try to play games around that. And now we know all those games, and we were able to clean those up.
Good. I'll make one last point there, but before I do, I know that there was a question in regards to other cities. And I know early on, Los Angeles had tried something that really bombarded them with the flood of applications. And I think as of recent, they too were going to do a lottery system. And I think the city of Stockton was also in that. So I'm not sure if that's something that happened recently, but I understand in doing my research is that at least two of these big cities were introducing these lotteries to avoid such litigations. I am certainly not opposed to that. I think that's a great deal. I think, Arnoldo, you brought up some good options there that possibly for retail. But then you have these other players such as the manufacturers, cultivators, testing labs, and what have you. And I don't know that those would require, I'm not sure when you see applications, David, if it's mainly around the retail side than it is these other components of the cannabis industry.
Councilman, that's correct. And we really are focusing on the retail here. And as the city manager had indicated, an option we provided to you is that it's a non-competitive or just a quality control process for the non-retail. And the reason I say that is 98% of the applications now are really about retail. Fresno is a good example, since I know that you like to kind of reference it a little bit. We received 140 applications in Fresno, but only 24 of them were for non-retail.
Yeah, and one thing,
yeah.
And one thing, David, that I would add is that if we have a company or an entity that can bring this vertical integration of a business that can provide, hundreds of jobs, then why wouldn't we be biased on that? Why wouldn't we want to select someone or a company that has that type of influence to bring in better jobs to our community? I understand the retail, and that's the competitive nature of this business, but I certainly don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot from not attracting a good industry that can certainly bring robust industry to our community. And those are my comments. So I know that I'm sure other council members have other comments, but thank you again for that presentation. I really want to applaud you, Hilda, and our city manager for taking the time and really hammering this out and allowing us to give you feedback and direction so that we can bring this back and create a comprehensive ordinance. Thank you again.
So next, we're going to have two other city council members be able to ask questions. The first is Council Member Evans.
Yes, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to our city manager, our attorney, David, and anyone else that participated in this. My first question is, how many dispensaries are we talking about possibly having here in Madera? Second, I would like to add churches to be on the sensitive list. I understand that we have the schools that are there, the parks that are there, but why 300 feet? Because every other city is doing 300 feet. We have parks right sitting directly in the center of our city, and 300 feet would be what? How far would that be from, say, Town and Country, or even from, what is that, Rotary Park? There's too many different avenues around, and you have the homelessness. So is it okay if we have it out in the outer perimeters of the city versus directly inside of the city? Those are some of my questions that I would like to ask.
If I may, Mayor, I will begin to answer some of them, and on one of them, I'll defer to David. So in terms of the number of retail outlets, that is yet to be decided, Councilwomen. That's going to be up to the City Council, and the City Council can provide direction this evening. You can provide some ballpark figures. We can go back, we can study it. Or at the end of the day, the council can just say the number is 4 and the number becomes 4. I'm obviously simplifying it here, but that's how public policy occurs.
Right.
In terms of religious institutions, if it's the council's desire to add to that, we can most definitely do that. My suggestion would be to allow staff to go back and to map that out with any threshold. The number 300 feet, that number is only in relationship to the public notice, not necessarily to say a business cannot go be located. That's just who's going to receive a notice. The state of California identifies, David, I believe it's 1,000 feet from those 3 uses. Am I correct?
600 feet. 600 feet.
So it's 600 feet from schools, daycares, and youth facilities, and there's really strict definitions as to what those are. If we were going to do religious institutions, again, that my ask would be to provide that direction to staff. We'll go back. One of the challenge with religious institutions is sometimes it's difficult to know where they're located. And so while we may think we have an idea of where they're all located, if they do not have a business license, then we may not be knowledgeable about where they're at. So we would want to take a look at that. And going back to the parks and churches, you bring up an excellent point in that hypothetically, if the council were to elect to say downtown Madera is an excellent place to have one, one of the challenges we would want to look at is there are parks. We have the John Wall Center, which is just north of our downtown. We also have Courthouse Park, which is in the heart of the city. And there are several religious institutions near or that pepper the periphery of the downtown. And so if we do not allow them, if we require 300 feet or 600 feet, we might by de facto, we may not allow any in downtown. 300 feet, to put that in perspective, is a football field. So if you take a football field, that's exactly 300 feet. Traditionally downtowns, not all downtowns, but traditionally a downtown city block is roughly 400 feet. Again, that's not every downtown. but that's historically, that's a general, a pretty good rule of thumb. If you take a look at some of your homes, your homes in your older parts of the community are 50 foot in width.
Mhm.
The newer parts of the community are typically 60 to 65. So it kind of gives you a general frame of reference to say 50 feet, 300 feet, you're talking 6 homes, roughly. It's just a ballpark figure, but the best way is a football field is 300 feet.
Okay.
So thank you. And hopefully that answered your questions, Councilwoman Evans.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Montes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad everybody had really good questions because it makes my questions a lot less. So, thank you for the presentation. So, my first question would be on the 1 permit versus 2, and I think it's obvious, but I want to ask the question. Even though we're going to a 1 permit process, they're still checking all the boxes of the two permit process, right? It's just a consolidation of, okay, we're going to submit something for them to get the permit, and then we're going to submit something to Gary to say, okay, they're going to have the go ahead to operate where they are, or however many. Is that assumption correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I see Hilda, she's nodding, and David was slightly nodding. And so if I say anything that's incorrect, feel free to jump in. So yes, they still have to check the boxes for both. The benefit of the 1 permit versus the 2. One of the things about conditional use permits in California is that communities and community members and councils are very comfortable with a conditional use permit because they've been required. So there's a lot of familiarity with the CUP. Where in our case, we're recommending that we go to the 1 permit system because there's still an annual review on every application. So if you do happen to have a bad operator, I'm not gonna say you simply don't renew it. There's a process for that. But there's a different process, whereas a conditional use permit, if you have a bad operator, you do have to go through the revocation process, which is a quasi-judicial process, which I'll defer to Hilda, but I know it's challenging and it's time consuming. And so you still have to check the box for both. Our thinking in terms of the 1 permit versus the 2, again, it's to streamline the process. We've heard during our discussions with council is to try to make this process as seamless as possible. We want to help the business community, and that was our approach without giving anything up. And at the same time, still including the community. And that's why we added the public meeting component, because traditionally the community meeting would be a component of the conditional use permit. But because if we're not going to require a conditional use permit, we still want the community to have an opportunity to provide feedback. And if David and Hilda want to add to anything I said.
I think you've covered it, Mr. City Manager. I think in your spreadsheet, was it step 4 that describes that, and it's what we would call the land use component, the land use step, and as the city manager noted, in some cases, we don't think in many, but in some cases, many, especially in the non-retail, there may be stricter CEQA analysis that's required, whereas for the retail, it might, because it's by use, you may not have the CEQA triggered, but there is a land use component.
Okay, thank you. The other question, or I guess the other comment, would be for the lottery system. So that I believe it's gonna. I mean, obviously, the intent is to limit litigation or for potential litigation. But that also, because one of my concerns was that we can have an operator come in and get all the permits and essentially, I don't want to say hold them hostage, but resell them or something. And I know that's addressed with the ownership change at 51%. So I don't really have a problem with the lottery system. And again, is my assumption incorrect by assuming that would help with that? The lottery system would help with situations like that, where an operator would come in, one operator comes in and gets 4 licenses where we're only issuing 5, and they can kind of hold them hostage or resell them or something?
Well, they wouldn't even be eligible because, as Mr. McPherson noted, in the application process, there will be declarations under penalty of perjury as to ownership and the like, and statements. So that that's going to be a part of what we call step 2 in the spreadsheet, as far as the procedures that'll come back to you in form of a resolution. but yeah, I think that's where we would hold the line.
Okay, thank you. And then, so for public meetings and sensitive uses, I don't have a problem with using state thresholds. I think they're pretty well established. And again, we can't go below them, but I wouldn't have a problem using them. And then, so for the council role of city manager, I do, well, my preference would be that the city council be the appealing body. That would be my preference. So at the end of the day, we would have the final say. We're not giving up that control, and we can give our input if it's necessary or if it's solicited. And I think I've touched on everything: ownership changes and location changes. Those are the questions that you had for us, right, Arnoldo?
Correct. Yes, correct. I do have, there's probably a lot more questions, but these were some of the key questions that we simply wanted feedback. I suspect this is going to be somewhat of an iterative process, either tonight or during an upcoming meeting, where council will say, well, we like this component, and then that may change a different component or element to it. And so those are different items. But yes, as much feedback as the council would like to provide this evening, we would welcome it, and that provides us an opportunity to go back, digest the comments. We'll go back, we'll recalibrate the draft ordinance that Hilda alluded to, because again, we did have a draft ordinance prepared, but the more we spoke and internally we said, you know what, I think there's a different process we can take that would expedite it on the back end, and the back end being the approval process for the businesses. And that was really partially our goal.
Okay. And is there any way that, so once we have these drafts, and I'm sure we don't want to put a bunch of different versions out, but if we can get that to the ad hoc committee so we can get their input on it, because you can have a little bit easier conversation with them. And also if we can get a comment period for the public. I mean, yeah, we're going to have the community meetings, but you're not necessarily going to have everybody come out to those meetings and speak on here. But if they can submit a comment, just like Mr. Khan did, saying, because I don't know everything, we don't know everything. I mean, I know we do have a lot of experts that do know a lot, but we do want to get that community input and operator input as well. So if I could request that, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, because we don't have that yet, right? We don't have that ordinance yet. That's something that you're still developing, but that would be my request.
That's correct. And I know the mayor is probably going to have a lot of comments. And Mayor, when you do, what I would recommend is on those questions that we try to get, like maybe go through each question to make sure that we have a sense of what the majority of the council wants on the questions, because in all fairness, say one of you spoke on one thing and we think that's your input, but none of the others liked it. We don't know. So that's why my recommendation is that we kind of go through them and just, it's not formal action, so you don't have to do roll call, but just kind of let's see how many hands we have for input at this time and direction that the city manager has presented.
I'm going to take this moment to give my 2 cents. First of all, anytime we have a project of this magnitude, it's going to take time to digest. Unfortunately, we will not be able to make a decision, I don't believe, tonight as to a lot of direction. The rest of my colleagues, this is the first time they're seeing these documents, because it wasn't in the report on the agenda. It's presented as a workshop tonight. So what I would say is that rather than give you a couple of points to say, yeah, this is what we agree on, I'd like to move this on to another meeting where we would have time to digest what you have. This is a great piece of work that was presented to us tonight. And we can start then to consult amongst our constituents, people who are interested parties, to take the time to look at it and then debate, and then come back at a later point and then give you direction. Because right now, really, since this is the very first time that my colleagues are looking at this, they might have, like you said, Hilda, yeah, I like this idea, but this other person might say, well, I'm not sure about that. I have to look at it or compare it what I'm listening to. And I do appreciate your input, David. Thank you very much for that. You have many folks out there that have worked with you and have speak highly of your the work that you've done. And obviously, Arnoldo bringing you in, he also feels that, and I think that's very important. One of the main things I want to make sure is that people in our community understand that everything that we're going to be doing regarding this issue is going to be transparent. It's going to be put out in front of folks. There's nothing that's going to be hidden or in any way, shape, or form done incorrectly. We will present this and do workshops and talk about it because obviously people care about this issue. And I personally would like to make sure that at the end of the day, even though we won't agree on everything, at least we come together and meet in the middle so that we can do the best that we can. It's going to be very important for Madera. We're going to be able to provide good paying jobs. We're going to be able to provide benefits. We're going to be able to deal with the black market. We're going to be able to work on making our community a better place based upon how we do this brand new industry. So it was passed by 67% of the folks, the voting members in our community. I think we have a very strong okay for us to move forward. We just need to work out the details. It's always in the details. You know, how many dispensaries, how many feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my opinion, that we use this as a beginning point so that we can move forward and digest this and then come back with further ideas in the future. Do any of my other colleagues have anything else to say before we move on?
Mr. Mayor, I had raised my hand. I will just add to that comment you made there. I think it's important, great points that you brought out. I would like to see a timeline as to how this moves and when we can anticipate possible adoption or of an ordinance for this industry. But I do appreciate all those points that you touched on. I think it's important for us to be transparent. But we also have to have, I mean, I'd like to see, if my colleagues would agree, is some type of timeline as far as when can we anticipate the next move? Where do we go from here? And where are we at? And the ad hoc, what's our role? And what would the council, the remainder council, like to see the ad hoc partake in this process? What role would you like us to partake in this process?
So for the the last point that you made regarding the ad hoc, we have a problem in that we don't have the complete council, and that kind of puts us at a disadvantage, because I value both you being on the ad hoc and then Council Member Montes being on the ad hoc committee, also because of the knowledge and participation. But unfortunately, we really can't have a full ad hoc committee meet and discuss this. So already we're looking at that would be at the end of January before we could have a full ad hoc committee. As far as like your question that you're asking about our participation, I think that we should have input, definite input, into getting some of these numbers and putting them on paper so that we can work in tandem with Mr. Rodriguez on getting some of these questions answered. So timeline, Mr. Rodriguez, do you have any kind of indication of what you could possibly see as far as a tentative timeline?
Yeah, let me throw a couple of items out. If the council and the community would give us about 24 hours to post this on our website, because again, it is very dense. And so what we'll do is we'll post a PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll also, on a different item, we will post the spreadsheet that breaks down every step. That'll take us about a day at the very most. It'll probably be done by the morning, but just in case. And then we could always come back to council at our next meeting, which is January the 20th, for feedback on some of the items this evening. Again, that's a relatively quick turnaround, or else we can come back to first meeting of February. And as the council is well experienced, I'm not very good at reading a calendar. So it looks like it's February 3rd. Would be our first meeting in February. So we can either come back to council as a follow-up to this meeting with come with some direction on January the 20th, or we can come back February 3rd. My recommendation this evening would be that we come back to council to get direction on some of the key items tonight prior to staff beginning to prepare an ordinance, because the ordinance is going to largely be tailored to the direction we receive from council. After we receive that and we tailor it, what we my recommendation would be that we come back to council another time, flesh out some of the details, and then after that, post it for public review, going back to what Councilmember Montes had recommended, that we allow a fairly exhaustive, a very transparent process. And what we can do at that point is we can even conduct a community meeting. More than likely, it's going to be on Zoom, but I think some of it's difficult to say specific timelines. I think some of that's going to be dictated by council's direction this evening. We can come back the next meeting, or again, the first meeting in February, just to flesh out some of these items. But it would be very difficult for staff to continue writing an ordinance without identifying some key items. So not to punt it back to council, but my ask of council would be, would you like me to bring it back the next meeting or February the 3rd? Or we can even always have a special meeting next week where we only talk about these items for some additional direction. I'll largely leave it up to the council.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I certainly would like to see that we bring this back either on our next meeting or possibly sooner in a special meeting, depending on how the rest of the council feels. But I think that should give us enough time to divulge over the information that was presented to us tonight. But I think it's important for not only our city manager, but also HDL and our attorney to start preparing for this draft. Because again, it's going to be a draft that we can change before we finalize it, but we have to give them somewhat of a direction as to what they want to add to this ordinance. And I think they're going to, again, put this back on our end. And I'm willing to do this here within a week or the next meeting that's available. I think it's important that we give our staff direction so that they can start putting this ordinance together.
So I know that you had mentioned for the 20th. Was that the date you were looking at?
Yeah, because that would be our next meeting, January the 20th, if that's okay by council.
Can I see an okay from the rest of it?
I'm good. I'm good with the 20th. Good with the 20th.
Okay. All right.
Sooner the better.
Gallegos? Mr. Villegas? Mr. Evans? Okay. All right then. We'll bring it back on the 20th.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, council.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
All right, moving on to the item B, the consent calendar. Matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion and one vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, a member of the public or a member of the council may request an item be removed from the consent calendar and it will be considered separately. Do we have any members of the council wishing to change or object to any of the items on the consent calendar?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull item B5 for a separate discussion, please.
Item B5. Are there any others? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I so move to approve the consent calendar excluding B5 as presented.
I second the motion.
So a motion's been made and seconded by Councilwoman Gallegos and Councilwoman Evans. Do we have the roll call vote at this point, Alicia, and then we come back to that, or do we go to that first item first?
Yes, we'll conduct the roll call, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
District 1?
Yes.
District 2?
Yes.
Thank you. District 3,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 6, District 6.
That was a yes, Alicia. He was muted.
He's
Thank you.
nodding his head.
Thank you.
And Mayor Garcia?
Yes.
Motion passes with 6 yes votes and 0 no votes. Thank you.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rodriguez, were you pulling that completely or were you wanting to have a separate discussion?
No, just a separate discussion. I just want to make
Okay.
a comment on that, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
You know, item B5 is actually introducing or appointments of the new planning commissioners or reappointment of one and a new planning commissioner. But before, you know, we went through that, I also wanted to recognize the exiting planning commissioner, Mr. Israel Cortez. I wanted to thank him personally for all this service that he provided for the planning commission. And I'm excited to see that both Mr. Ramon Lopez and Rohi Sakuraya are being added to the planning commission. That was just the comments I wanted to make. A lot of the times, these folks serve in a thankless job. Sometimes they don't get paid for these particular jobs, but there's nothing like having some sense of recognition for them and for their service that they provided. So again, I just want to recognize Mr. Israel Cortez and wish him well in his newly elected position at the Madera Unified, and congratulate these two folks and being appointed to the Planning Commission. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve item B5 as presented.
Second.
We have a second.
Second right here.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Rodriguez, second by Councilmember Montes. Clerk, Alicia, please, could you could call the roll call vote, please?
You're on mute, Alicia.
District 1,
Yes.
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 4,
Yes.
District 6,
Yes.
Mayor Garcia.
Yes.
Motion passes with 6 yes votes and 0 no votes.
Thank you very much. We don't have any public hearings under item C. We will move on to petitions, bids, resolutions, ordinances, and agreements. I believe it will be a report by Mr. Conti.
Yes, it will, Mayor. Thank you. Gary, you're on mute.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Gary Conti, Planning Manager, and I'm going to share my screen in regards to the discussion before you. I'm on screen two. My apologies. There we go. All right. I'm going to presume that you almost all can see this on the full screen.
We can see it, Gary, just not on the full screen.
Not on the full screen.
Not on the full screen.
That's odd. Oh, it went on the number 2. My apologies. It's driving. It's wanting to go ahead and play on my other screen, unfortunately. Let me back that out. Some of the challenges, I think. Let me step out and move it to number 2. Okay, number 3. Screen 3. Are we up now?
We are, but not on the full screen, Gary. Yeah, that's okay. You can just continue like this.
Well,
no.
Are you sure now, folks? I've sit there in trouble with it, but if this is okay with you, I apologize.
And this is perfectly fine.
Okay, let me roll into it. What we have before you is an amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Provost and Pritchard Consulting Group, who happens to be the one of our planning consultant firms to provide us contract planning services. The purpose of this contract request, or the amendment to the contract, is to provide the continued professional planning service assistance to the planning department. And the reasons are basically, one is that the planning department is experiencing a substantial amount of land use and entitlement applications at this point. And Provost and Pritchard, who was brought on contract in June of this year, has provided basically invaluable resources to us as a planning team to help us and enable us to process and complete land use entitlement applications on a reasonable and expected time frame. And in part, absent their help and assistance, much with others, we would be unable to basically provide the appropriate and desirable levels that the service is deservable to the city and the Planning Commission and to our City Council. What the request entails is basically a fee increase of $50,000. The scope of the work and the services remain the same as it was originally outlined in the agreement that was exercised in June of this year. The terms of that agreement remain the same as it was defined in the original agreement. And in order to finance the additional request for fee increase, we would be looking towards requesting funds from the city's general fund source, the unassigned funds, and it would require an obligation or council appropriations for that to finance that fee increase. I mind also the council that we do collect fees for applications, and so some of that cost will be recouped through the receipt of application fees and be placed and deposited into our city's general fund account. So there's a measurable, not a full $50,000 cost to the city. So what I'm requesting and what we're requesting here is from the planning department is that the city adopt a resolution approving amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Provost and Pritchard Consulting Group to increase the not to exceed compensation fee that is for their services for an additional $50,000, which comes out now to a total of $100,000, and to authorize the finance director to transfer $50,000 from the city's 2021 unrestricted funds, reserve funds, and to place that in the planning department's 2021 contract services account to provide the means to finance continued services from Provost and Pritchard for planning services. I'm happy to entertain any questions that the mayor or the council may have for me.
Do any of my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Kant regarding D1? Alicia, do we have any comments from the public? I don't see any here on the board.
No, Mayor.
Oh, yes, we do. We have one. Is that Mr. Latif?
I believe it is, Mayor. Mark, would you let him in, please?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Latif.
It appears like Mr. Latif is on mute. Mr. Latif, if you can hear us, would you mind unmuting?
You can hear, sir?
Yes, now we can. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good evening, sir, honorable city council member and all staff. Actually, in public comments, my Zoom system was disturbed, but I have one question if you give me permission.
Is this a public comment regarding item D1?
No, sir. It was regarding Madera City Council District 5 vacancy.
Hilda, can you give me some guidance on this?
It appears he wanted to speak under the general public forum, and he noted that he had problems with Zoom and was unable to speak. It is up to you, your discretion to allow this one instance because of his technical problems.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I do appreciate that. Mr. Latif, yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir. There one question and clarification about Madera City Council District 5 vacancy. If somebody own multiple homes but not living in that district, so he cannot apply for appointment?
Hilda, would you like to take that on?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question, Ms. Mayor. Was the question whether a person must reside in the district if he or she wishes to apply?
With the provision of they do not live in the district, but owns homes in the district.
No, sir. Under the city code, a member may represent a district only if he or she lives in the district. They must reside in the district.
Thank you for that clarification. Does that satisfy your answer, Mr. Latif?
Yes, sir. But because he or she own multiple homes, and so many times they go there and just like repair or work in touch that area and that district. But if the code not allowed, that's fine, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. I believe we were on item D1. If there's no other comments or questions from my colleagues or any other attendees, I'll bring it back to council for action.
Mr. Mayor, move to approve item D1 as presented.
Second.
Then motion to approve item D1 by Council Member Montes, second by Council Member Gallegos. Alicia, will you call a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Mayor. District 1. You're on mute, Councilmember Gallegos.
Yes.
Thank you. District 2.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 4.
Yes.
District 6.
Yes.
Mayor Garcia.
Yes.
Motion passes with 6 yes votes and 0 no votes.
Thank you very much. We will move on to administrative reports. Item E1, discussion on status and action taken on measures to mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Rodriguez, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'm not going to get into the vaccine distribution because Sarah Boss had previously covered it at the onset of our meeting this evening. This is simply a reminder for the community that city facilities continue to be closed. However, we are open for services. Office employees are currently teleworking, so they are more than welcome to call us or send us an email. And if they do drop off their utility payments, they can drop them off at the mailbox right outside of City Hall. We check that mailbox multiple times a day, and we do have a camera that points directly at it in case any community members concerned about vandalism. We have yet to experience any vandalism at that mailbox. And we also have drop boxes both for human resource items or city manager items, as well as our building departments. Our building inspectors have continued to work, so we have not had any holdups due to the COVID-19 pandemic on building inspections. Steve and his team have done an excellent job of ensuring that our employees are safe while at the same time providing that service. So that concludes status update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. We now move on to item F, council member reports and announcements for future agenda items. Do any of my colleagues have anything?
Mr. Mayor, will you be going down the line, or is this you're asking for individuals to have their council member reports?
Yes, sir. Let's go ahead and start with District 1, Council Member Gallegos.
I've missed seeing everybody a whole year. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm glad everybody's safe and they're here tonight. That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I said that only because I'm in District 2 and I go second. So thank you. I too wanted to wish everybody a happy new year. I know that with this COVID, we've all been pretty cooped up. So I just hope that staff and everyone out there stays healthy, continue to shelter and utilize the precautions that the CDC and our public health has suggested for us. I know that we'll overcome this. Hopefully, by the springtime, we'll have a better outlook of our meetings. But anyhow, again, I just want to wish everybody a happy new year and a safe as well. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Council Member Evans?
Yes, I just want to say it's good to see you. I've only been on council for a month now, so you know it's nice. I'm enjoying this, going around and spreading joy. So everyone continue to be safe. Corona is for real. I lost my mother-in-law and my aunt, and they both passed from Corona. So everyone, please be safe. Happy New Year, and I can't wait for us to all be in chambers together. So God bless.
And please receive our condolences, Council Member Evans. We feel for your family, and we'll say a prayer for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Council Member Villegas.
Well, I wish everybody a happy new year, and glad to see you all together again tonight. And let's move forward to whatever comes. And that's it.
Thank you, sir. And I, for one, I want to thank Councilmember Evans for her words this morning. I asked her to speak directly regarding our turmoil in Washington, D.C. I know a lot of people are worried, but at the end of the day, our democracy is strong. This too shall pass. Everyone should be concerned regarding their elected officials who are going under some stressing times right now, representing us, doing our government's work, the people's work. But stay strong. Believe that we are a strong nation. We've been through many, many things, and we will get past this too. And so everyone in our community, be strong. Believe in our country that we're going to be okay at the end of the day. Democracy will prevail. So I want to thank everyone very much for joining us tonight. We will now go into closed session. If Hilda, you would take us into closed session, please.
Mayor Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt. I probably should have said something a little bit earlier. I think you skipped over me.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Mr. Montes.
I want to say that and then say nothing to report. No, I'm just kidding. No, I just want to say happy New Year to everybody. Condolences to Councilwoman Evans. I know going through a lot, so prayers going out to you, and everybody stay safe. I know there's a light at the end of the tunnel now with some of the information that's coming out. So hopefully 21 is a lot better for everybody, the country, the world than 2020 was. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very much. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, my apologies for that, trying to navigate this. So, Hilda, would you please take us to closed session?
I will take you to closed session, Mr. Mayor and Council. Before that, I do want to say cheers to the rule of law and to our democracy. Under G1, we have conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation under Government Code Section 54956.9D4, one case, City of Madera versus High Speed Rail Authority. D2, public employee performance evaluation under Government Code Section 54957B1, position, city manager.
Thank you very much. We will now go into closed session.
out of closed session. City Council discussed 2 items this evening in closed session. Item G1, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, City of Madera versus High Speed Rail Authority, no reportable action. Item G2, public employee performance evaluation, title city manager, no reportable action. Mayor, back to you.
Thank you very much. I don't have the date.
Next one is the 20th.
Thank you. Thank you very, that's right, February 20th. Next meeting is on February 20th. Thank you very much.
January 20th.
January 20th, and this meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone. Sleep tight.
Adios.
Bye.